Hey, gang. How's it going?
Hey, gang. How's it going?
Born teacher. Today, we're going to be taking a look at imperialism, otherwise known as white people behaving badly. At the beginning of your packet,
Okay.
you going to be okay? So, at the beginning of your packet, you're going to see two things to warm your brain up just a little bit. Firstly, there's a giant picture of Cecil Rhodes. I want you to take a look at the picture of Cecil Rhodes and ask yourself, how does this cartoon reflect the dreams and aspirations of Cecil Rhodes? Pretty easy. Then the second thing, you'll see two maps at the bottom of your packet. One is from 1789. The other one is from 1914. They're both of the African continent. I want you to answer those three questions and then move on in the video. Let's see here. Oh, hey, welcome to my kitchen. Today we're going to be preparing a special meal. Let's see. It's a special meal for some special guests just like you. Do you have any special guests coming to your dinner? This will be a good one. Tonight, we're going to prepare a little bit of imperialism. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our pot. We'll put that right here on the burner. And into this pot, we need to measure 1 cup of nationalism. So I'm going to go grab the nationalism from the cabinet while you take a look at this.
But in America, it was different. The Founding Fathers landed in 16... They set off from Plymouth and landed in Plymouth. How lucky is that? This is Plymouth. We've just come from Plymouth. We've gone round in a circle. Lads, back on the bus. They finally got there, said, this is where our God has brought us to. We can practice our religion here. We can raise a family. There's nobody here. Excuse me? There's nobody here. Yes, a land empty of human existence. Who the f*** are these guys? What's all this, please? No, we don't want any of your food, thank you very much. Just put some clothes on. Meanwhile, that winter, excuse me, do you have any food? I love all this, lovely idea. Yes, I'm sorry, we're a bit brusque when we first arrived. We didn't realize you owned the entire country. But you have no system of ownership. Interesting. Maybe that can come in useful later. Food, thank you very much, very nice. Yes, there's more of us coming, but we'll keep our promises. Oh, yeah. So there was a lot of that, and we built up empires. We stole countries. That's what you do. That's how you build an empire. We stole countries with the cunning use of flags. Yeah. You just sail around the world and stick a flag in. I claim India for Britain. And they go, you can't claim us. We live here. 500 million of us. Do you have a flag? We don't need a bloody flag. It's our country, you bastard. No flag, no country. You can't have one. That's the rules that I've just made up. And I'm backing it up with this gun that was lent from the National Rifle Association. So after the Second World War, the whole, world was going, come on, Europe, give these countries back. Come on, we've had a bloody war. Let's give them back. Britain, what? What's that behind your back? Oh, it's India and a number of other countries. Give them back. Oh, all right. It's that one. It's that one. Falkland Islands. Oh, we need the Falkland Islands for strategic sheep purposes.
All right, so I have my 1 cup of nationalism, which you all know is a feeling of pride or identification or loyalty with your nation. We're defining our nation now as not only just a government, but a border and a common set of land, usually defined with symbols, like flags. We're going to take this nationalism, we're going to dump it right into the pot here. The next thing that we're going to need is we are going to need a whole cup of social Darwinism. I'm going to go to the fridge and grab some social Darwinism. See, social Darwinism is essentially the same thing as racism. It's legitimizing your nation as being the best nation, or at least better than those other nations. And in large part, you're defining that betterness based upon technological advancement, government advancement, civilization, if you will. This motivation to civilize and modernize and westernize will be a huge part of our imperialism stew. Thirdly, we're going to need 12 ounces of good old-fashioned militarism. It's the military motives that provide a way towards your nation's goals. Let's go to the fridge and we'll grab some more militarism. Ah, yes. Stewart's original 150-calorie bottle of militarism. Oh, we need a half teaspoon of... Gotta shut the fridge. Always gotta shut the fridge. We're gonna need a half teaspoon of natural resources. Natural resources. Aha! Natural resources. We're gonna need a half teaspoon, which essentially is like 3 shakes. Yeah. We're gonna need that. We're also gonna need about 1/8 of a teaspoon of this thing called The White Man's Burden, which was a poem by Rudyard Kipling. You'll probably read it in class. It's a wonderful piece of garbage. I mean, it's a good poem, like in terms of poetry, but its themes are horrendous. And it's used as an artistic justification for systemic racism. We need 1/8 of a teaspoon of that. So, yep, White Man's Burden. Okay. Now, we're going to fire this beast up for about, I don't know, maybe 150 years or so. And that's gonna give us our stew of imperialism. So you might be asking yourself, exactly what is imperialism? Well, that's a very good question. The concept of a stronger, more industrialized country, usually a westernized country, something with a Western government, with a parliament and a modern military, taking over weaker countries. It doesn't necessarily mean that the stronger country is geographically bigger. It means that they're more technologically strong, they're more technologically advanced, and thus they can more easily take over a less technologically advanced country. So you have small countries like Belgium taking over massive regions of Africa like the Congo. Once we get this stew to cooking, we're going to talk a little bit more about the economic and the political and the technological and the social causes, things that led countries in the 1800s, countries in the 1900s, and frankly, even countries today to imperialize other countries. So let's go on over there. We'll check it out. Hey, welcome back again. Today we're talking about the social advancements, the governmental advancements, the technological advancements that led Europeans to colonize and functionally terrorize the vast majority of the non-white world. This is one of those units that I like to call white people behaving badly. We're going to follow these white people today to Africa. Why did they feel the need to imperialize? What was in it for them? Well, to begin with, a little bit of raw materials. Remember, these countries are industrialized, and industrial countries require natural resources in order to continue to stay industrialized. When you're in an island nation like Great Britain, you have limited natural resources. So sometimes you have to look outside of your own boundaries to find those natural resources. Thus, England will spend a great deal of money and time and effort going around the world, setting up empire. Secondly, you need to have new markets to sell the stuff to. Great Britain is going to be a massive textile producer. And if you have no one to sell those textiles to, then what's the point in making them? So you can go and colonize someplace, say India, and you can mine India for its raw materials, bring that stuff back to your country, make cloth with it, and then sell that same cloth back to the Indian people that you currently control and imperialize. It's not a bad plan if you're a dirtbag. You know, if you're a nice person, it sounds pretty horrible because you know what? It is. Nextly, you need to have a place to put all of your unemployed citizens. In Great Britain particularly, Great Britain during the Industrial Age had a lot of out-of-work farmers, and those out-of-work farmers will need a place to go. In Belgium and Holland and Germany, they'll find the same things. So oftentimes, out-of-work people will go to the colonies seeking new work. Additionally, you're going to need to have a place to store the excess wealth that you're developing. So in one of my favorite African countries, Uganda, you'll notice when you go, because of course you will go, it is a wonderful place. You'll go to the city of Jinja, which was a British resort town. And you go to Jinja and it's stunning. I mean, marble columns and hotels, and it's just plain beautiful. Because the British invested a great deal of money into making it beautiful for British citizens. It's pretty cool. So you have economic reasons. You also have political reasons to imperialize. The first of which is that you need to have a network of Navy bases and a network of merchant marine bases from which to trade stuff to. So particularly Great Britain will build a massive network of merchant marine bases and Navy bases all throughout the globe to transport the materials to. Secondly, there's also so much to be gained by having land all over the place. And so Great Britain will work extremely hard establishing their empire. An empire is essentially when you have land spread out all across the world that you call your own colonies, protectorates, or territories, or dominions. Great Britain has hundreds of them. They still have over 50. I believe it's in the mid 70s, but don't quote me on that. Of territories and protectorates and dominions that are still under the British rule. The United States has territories. We have American Samoa and Guam and other islands in the South Pacific and the Caribbean. That's all part of setting up empire. It's a very important aspect to controlling the world. Additionally, you'll have a spirit of nationalism brewing throughout Europe. Our friend Eddie Izzard has already told you a little bit about nationalism with flags. But nationalism, that spirit of loyalty to your nation, of pride in your nation, and of a desire to promote your nation globally, will go into imperialism. So you have economic reasons, you have geopolitical reasons, you also have social and cultural reasons for imperializing. And these are particularly dirtbaggy. First of which, white people in Europe felt the need to evangelize the rest of the world. If you are not a church-going type of person, or this specific kind of church-going person, that word might be totally new to you. It essentially means to convert people to your religion. What particularly 18th century Christianity in Europe felt the need to do was to Christianize the rest of the world. In America, we did the same thing with Native Americans and with the native peoples of Mexico and the Caribbean. We felt the need to Christianize them as well. And usually this Christianizing comes at the end of a gun or the end of a sword, because clearly that is one of the best ways to convince somebody that you're a nice person and that they should believe the thing that you believe, is to do it at the end of a gun. Europeans felt the need to spread Christianity. They also felt the need to spread Western civilization. Western civilization being things like a parliamentary government and a monetary system and maybe a system of nations and cities and towns and what have you that most of Africa had not really adopted at this point. Africa was still largely tribal, though you might remember hundreds of years before, guys like Mansa Musa had networked cities all throughout North Africa. So it's not as though the African people are simply not capable of developing their own form of civilized culture. It just looked remarkably different from Europeans. And because Europeans are white and Europeans are right, they tend to think that, you know, their system is better. Please understand that was entirely sarcasm. Additionally, the European settlers, they very much felt that their systems, that their ways, that their beliefs, that their technology and their culture was superior in every way to that of the Africans. They justified a lot of this racist attitude through science, actually. Pseudosciences like phrenology and phrenology and I'm forgetting the other one. But these sciences were used as justification for European racism. And last but not least, bing, Europeans had better tech. Europeans had things like machine guns, or early machine guns. They had cannons and cavalry and massive armies. Additionally, they had things like, in the 1800s, they had medicines like quinine, which made it so that Europeans in the 1600s, if they went to Africa, they would get bitten by mosquitoes, they'd get yellow fever, malaria, but now with quinine, you get bit by a mosquito and you're okay. It's pretty cool. And then last but not least, the Europeans had incredible technology. They had railways and steamships and steam engines, all of which helped them subdue and conquer this giant, massive, uncivilized resource of Africa that clearly no one else controlled. So, it was the Europeans' duty, burden to civilize the African continent and at the same time strip it of all its resources. And we're back. Let's talk about a real dirtbag. In 205, I have a list of the top 10 dirtbags of all time. King Leopold is a grade A, prime cut, bronze medal winning dirtbag. He is the king of Belgium, and he will take control of a region called the Congo in South Central Africa. There's a huge crop, in fact, there is in most tropical countries, of the specific kind of tree whose sap can be harvested and you can create rubber out of it. Rubber is essential if you are running factories, if you have any sort of modernized industry, from tires to gaskets to belts and things. You need rubber in order to run industry. So whoever controls the rubber trade controls industry internationally. So King Leopold, being the epic dirtbag that he is, he says, I want to get in on that. So he colonizes much of the Congo under the disguise, sending missionary work. He's going to be sending missionaries to the Congo to Christianize, to Westernize, to civilize, to teach these backward, half devil, half child people how to be civilized. What he's really doing, though, is he's intending on colonizing the space, enslaving the people, working them to death to harvest the rubber so that he can sell the rubber, control the rubber trade, and thus become extremely wealthy and internationally powerful. I want you to watch this video. And while you're watching this video, I want you to look for specific things. Firstly, what was the role of men? who were enslaved in the Congo, how were the women treated? And then what was the punishment if you didn't meet your quota of rubber sap? And then at the end, I want you to think, why was that the punishment?
The humiliation and violence inflicted on black Americans was mirrored in Africa. At the end of the 19th century, as Europe's powers scrambled for control of the continent's riches, the rights of the indigenous peoples were no impediment to their plans for conquest.
The attitude of white people in all Europe was tabula rasa, terra incognita. Here is a place which is a sort of no man's land, and in other words, we can create our own states there, and we're going to bring order and civilize them. Always the word civilized was used, whatever you were actually doing, whether you were shooting them, you were civilizing them. The vast majority of people thought they would need, at best, a paternalistic treatment, that they would need looking after, like children.
After the Conference of Berlin in 1885, Europeans embarked on a continent-wide land grab. In less than 20 years, 90% of African territory would be placed under European colonial rule. One of the main beneficiaries was King Leopold II of Belgium. Aware of the vast fortune to be made, he persuaded Europe's powers to recognize his sovereignty over one of Africa's largest regions, the Congo.
Here was this man who became King of Belgium in 1865 at the age of 30. Enormously shrewd, enormously greedy, enormously ambitious, and with an absolutely brilliant sense of public relations. He hired the explorer Henry Morton Stanley, the man who found Livingstone, to go to the Congo and essentially stake out this huge territory for him. Leopold got first the United States and then all the major nations of Western Europe to ratify his seizure of this enormous territory in the center of the continent.
First, Leopold created a smokescreen, claiming that he wished to educate a savage people.
They were all really fooled by Leopold because they took him at his word. They thought he was a man who's going to lose all his money in this crazy philanthropic venture. But they didn't realize what he was really after at all, which was to make himself hugely rich by exploiting brown hands and broad backs who were going to carry the wealth of Africa and load it on ships for his own personal profit.
Bring them!
Extreme violence was employed to impose Leopold's dominion. The right hands of those who failed to meet rubber quotas were severed. Even young children were not spared. In 1896, a German newspaper reported that 1,308 hands had been gathered in one day. Leopold created a 90,000-strong army to enforce his rule. One of his lieutenants wrote, "Only the whip can civilize the black."
They would go into village after village. The army would seize the women of the village and hold them hostage in order to force the men of each village to go into the forest and gather a monthly quota of wild rubber. And they did this for about 20 years. And you can just very easily imagine if you have a village where the women are all being held hostage, the men are all in the forest as forced laborers for several weeks out of each month. There's nobody to plant and harvest food, to go hunting, to go fishing, to do all the normal things through which a community feeds itself. So from all of these causes, starvation, being worked to death, and most of all from the disease that hit this famine-ridden population, the best estimates are that between 1880, when King Leopold first got his hands on the Congo, and 1920, that in that 40-year period, the population was slashed from about 20 million at the beginning of that period to around 10 million at the end. So an enormous loss of human life.
Huge building projects throughout Belgium were funded by Leopold's wealth to celebrate his reign. Leopold built himself a palace, now called the Museum of Central Africa, to display his spoils. For historian Bambi Koipins, whose father is Congolese, the building embodies the myths created to justify Belgian rule in the Congo.
The central hall gives you the idea of what the museum is supposed to be about. You have the central dome through which the light falls on the heart of darkness underneath, you can say. Simultaneously, the dome also presents the sky, God, and then in the central hall, underneath that representation of Leopold II, are statues of Congolese. So what you really see were the hierarchical relationships that structured the relations between the colonized and the colonizers. As a human being, I'm obviously shocked by that, because it is very clear that Africans, the way that this museum was originally set up and the way that most of the exhibitions still work, are really dehumanized because they were seen and represented as savages who really needed the help of outsiders, i.e. Europeans, to transform them into fully civilized human beings.
From the late 19th century onwards, human zoos exhibiting Africans in their primitive state became popular around Europe. One of the first was housed in the grounds of Leopold's museum.
The Africans were put on display so people could go and see them in very much the same way that they could look at, say, caged animals in a zoo, and their reactions were also very similar. There were notices saying that people were not allowed to throw peanuts at the Africans because that was what they did. This museum is also, in a very real sense, the only monument to Belgian colonial history left in this country. So if we dismantle the museum, there is a very great danger that we also eradicate the public memory of that colonial heritage. And once that happens, of course, one paves the way for all these people who say, well, it was not as bad as that, was it? And Leopold II really did do a great deal of good.
In 1908, the year before Leopold died, his crimes were made public and he was forced to hand control of the Congo over to the Belgian government. But the cruelty continued.
The forced labor system did not come to an end because it was so profitable. The new Belgian Congo continued it more or less until the early 1920s. At that point, the Belgian colonial officials realized that their population was shrinking so rapidly from the effects of the forced labor system that they had to modify it. They had to make it less lethal, or otherwise they would have no labor force left.
Although 10 million people died, the Congolese genocide has largely been forgotten in Europe. In the book The Heart of Darkness, the author Joseph Conrad, who witnessed the violence in the Congo, writes, "The conquest of the earth, which mostly means taking it away from those who have a different complexion or slightly flatter noses than ourselves, is not a pretty thing when you look into it too much."
One does not simply terrorize and savagely brutalize an entire region of Africa and then have it just disappear. These kinds of imperialistic trends have lasting effects. The fingerprints of Britain and France and the United States and Germany and Belgium remain all across the world in the lands that they imperialized. So I want you to take a look at two news stories that came out of Belgium in the last 2 years. The first one relates to the National Museum in Antwerp, I believe, in Belgium. It's the King Leopold Museum. Check that out. And then secondly, I want you to take a look at a piece by a conglomerate news organization from the EU called Euronews. And this is going to be related to some statues. Take a look at those two things, and I want you to create a 5-sentence summary. Summarize the entire video, its gist, what is the point of this video. And then secondly, I want you to try and connect it to a news story from our country from this year. My guess is that you'll be able to, and I think you'll be able to pretty easily. So you'll want to do this for the Euronews and for the BBC 4 piece that are now.
How does a country confront its own bloody past? A history of land stolen, lives lost, and objects plundered. We've been behind the scenes inside Belgium's Africa Museum, where they're grappling with reshaping the collective memory of a nation. It involves accepting uncomfortable truths, like the inhumanity of human zoos.
Almost every Belgian family has a relative that worked in Congo, and it's very emotional.
Retelling the stories of those long considered heroes.
This man was a murderer. He was the responsible of the death of million persons in the Congo.
And challenging those still unwilling to accept both the historical injustices and the multicultural societies of Europe today.
U spreekt van miljoenen mensen gestorven. Enfin, maar nee.
It's a fight for history, because how the past is told affects the future for generations to come.
We need to radically change that permanent exhibition. We have to become a museum on contemporary Africa. But how do we do that in a historic building with so many symbols of the colonial past?
First created in 1898, the Africa Museum was commissioned by King Leopold II. His initials are carved out throughout the building, a monument to himself and a glorification of Belgium's colonial adventures. Unmentioned, though, were the horrors of Leopold's Congo, a huge slave labour camp where Africans were tortured and the brutalities included chopping off hands.
So there you have, for example, a statue of Maton with the title Belgium Bringing Civilization to Congo. And you'll see a missionary there with two young Congolese. They were all there to do it for them. It was a very paternalistic attitude.
Even the architecture sought to reflect this claim. Belgium was bringing light to the darkness of Congo.
But there's not a single reference to the millions of African victims of colonization process. So gallery after gallery has this sort of imprint of colonial glory, of positive aspects, and to convince the Belgian public that really it had to support those activities.
But for 5 years, the place dubbed the last colonial museum in the world has been closed as it undergoes a £60 million revamp. The aim is to take a more critical look at the exhibits and acknowledge the suffering of the Congolese. And rather than removing, they're relabeling.
We looked around, and in all other European countries, they simply closed the colonial museums, and we decided, no, we're going to stay here and we'll do the renovation in here, which is an enormous challenge.
They're due to open in December, but there's still a struggle over what the permanent collection should look like. Some of the objects are highly offensive. Like the leopard man, made famous in the Tintin comics, it perpetrated stereotypes of the savage African man.
I grew up in the 50s, in a village not too far from here, and we regularly came here. And I often tell the story of how I felt about Africa every time I came into this museum. And it was one of fear, because what did I see here? Africans naked, with spears, with snakes.
The museum is determined to change that. They're introducing new exhibits by Congolese artists to confront objects from the past.
I really needed to create something to be in dialogue with colonial
statues.
Yeah. I need the hope, I need the peace, I need to work together, all people, and to think together about the future.
This piece is titled Congo New Breath. It plays on contrasts between light and dark in a mirroring of the original architecture. The tree above the face symbolises a journey towards hope.
And they removed the archives.
Yet not everyone is hopeful. Outside the museum walls, some activists believe Belgians are still in denial about their colonial history, and that changes to exhibits aren't enough when the shadow of colonial heroes still hangs over public spaces.
Most of Belgians used to think that Leopold II was a big king, was a huge king who built a big colony for them and who built most of the beautiful parks, most of the beautiful buildings in Belgium. But they don't want to know what was the origin of this money.
Do you want to see the statue torn down then?
No, we don't think that it's a good thing to remove the statues because it's important for us to teach people. We want a plaque on which it will be mentioned that this man was a murderer. He was the responsible of the death of million persons in the Congo.
Instead of removal, they want acknowledgement of a parallel history previously ignored. For 10 years, activists struggled to get a public space in honour of Congolese independence hero Patrice Lumumba. The Belgian government has admitted it was involved in his murder in 1961.
So this is it, this space here, that's it?
This is it. It's not a big place, it's not a beautiful place, but for us it's symbolically important because it's at the entrance of the African cultural area called Matonge.
A small strip of pavement next to a taxi rank. But better than nothing for a man who clearly styles himself, glasses and all, on his hero.
And this is not just happening here in Belgium. From Cape Town to Charlottesville to Oxford, debates are raging around the world about who should be up on a pedestal and how we deal with dark periods of history.
In Europe's multicultural cities, a younger generation descended from the colonies seeks recognition of past horrors, seeing it as a way to explain current discriminations. But they face a battle with those who look back on colonialism with pride. Guido Bastels worked in the Belgian colonial administration in Congo in the 1950s. He believes the Africa Museum should have been left just as it was.
Krachten aan de gang die dat koloniaal verleden aan de schandpaal willen spijkeren en dat men toch de verdiensten, het fantastische werk dat daar geleverd is, dat men dat helemaal wil verdonkeren manen.
But millions of people died under Belgium's rule in Congo. Is that something you're proud of?
U spreekt van miljoenen mensen gestorven. Maar nee. De bevolking is op schitterende manier toegenomen sedert België aan het bewind gekomen is.
But the brutality of Belgian rule in Congo is well documented. And Leopold didn't just plunder raw materials. In the summer of 1897, he imported more than 200 Congolese people to appear in a human zoo in Brussels. Such was the popularity of this zoo that 1 in 3 Belgians came to visit, and the museum was then established on this very site. The cruel theatre of putting Africans on display behind bamboo fences was common across Europe and astonishingly didn't end in Belgium until 1958.
Some Belgians were obviously very racist. They were throwing bananas and were doing as if they couldn't speak.
7 people died of pneumonia inside the human zoo in 1897 because of the cold conditions. Their bodies were initially dumped in an unmarked mass grave, but then later moved here, a short walk away from the museum. A reminder of the human cost of creating this institution. For decades, the names of white Belgians who died in Congo have been proudly displayed along the walls of the museum, with no mention of any Africans. This mural and other features have heritage status, which means they cannot be changed. But now the names of the 7 Congolese who died in the human zoo will be projected directly opposite. A small gesture in an attempt to remember a horrific injustice.
As the protests over police racism and brutality rumbled across European cities, some activists targeted their own country's colonial history. In Belgium, demonstrators spray-painted a statue of King Leopold II, whilst in the UK, a statue of 17th century slave trader Edward Colston was toppled and thrown into a river. Well, Ana Lucia Arujo is a historian who teaches at Howard University and joins me from Washington, D.C. Good evening. Many thanks for joining us on the programme. Whether we're looking at Confederate monuments in the US or these statues representing moments of colonial history in Europe, some would argue that these statues represent, albeit troubled moments, but they represent parts of our history. In that sense, do you see any part for these statues to play in our modern day life, erected around parks and significant places in our cities?
Thank you for having me. This is a long history and is also a long story that, of course, depends on each country. However, we know that either slavery or colonialism were transnational systems, and part of these systems was also to commemorate and memorialize these individuals who either supported the Atlantic slave trade or who supported the slavery. Then many of these monuments, they were created when these individuals were still alive. And many others, they were indeed unveiled after they were dead since very long, which is the case of the monument honoring Colston and many of the Confederate monuments here in the United States. Then they are not about history. They are about how particular groups, either black, whites, or who identify as black as whites, they perceive their past, they engage with the past. But they are not about history, they are about memory. They are about the particular moment when the monuments were created, usually to sustain, to support a particular agenda of a particular group. In this sense, we can say that many of these monuments, they don't have anymore any space to be in our societies, but of course, toppling them now is not necessarily the solution everywhere.
Absolutely, Ana Lucia, but if they do represent moments of history, but they are still here today, what do they say about our present? That they are still very much present in public spaces. What kind of message does that send out?
The message that sends out is that the ghost of this past, of this colonial past, is still haunting these spaces. Because in many of the places where these monuments are, we do not see any monument honoring black social actors who fought against racism or who fought against slavery. They are there reinforcing this colonial past and messages that reinforce the past that was based on racist ideas. And this is why in many places they needed to go.
So is your solution to take these statues down, or is there another way that one could progress by keeping these statues but informing maybe the public about the historical context?
There are certainly, let's take the example of Bristol. Then since the 1990s, scholars, historians, black concerned citizens, activists, they have been demanding either to contextualize that monument honoring Colston or to create plaques and other devices to contextualize that monument. Nothing was done. Even if there were several interventions that were made in that monument a number of times over the last years, the monument continued to be down. Then at some point, the groups, they take the justice in their own hands. They find a solution. There is a practical solution to a problem that has not been addressed by public authorities.
Yeah, not addressed by public authorities, absolutely. Well, fascinating talking to you, Ana Lucia Arujo there.
Remember Otto von Bismarck? I bet you do. He was the guy who unified Germany in 1871. He's the guy with the pointy hat. He's the guy with the weasel stapled to his face. That's the guy. He's going to host a conference called the Berlin Conference in 1884. The Berlin Conference has a very specific purpose. It's meant to give the European powers who are industrialized the opportunity to divide up Africa civilly without going to war with each other. They essentially set up rules, kind of like Risk, where they could go into Africa and carve it up according to these rules. The participants of this conference were countries like Great Britain, France, Belgium, Germany, Italy, Spain, your industrialized European nations. You know who wasn't there, though? Any representative from Africa whatsoever. That's because white people were behaving very badly. I want you to do the following reading on the Berlin Conference. As you go through, look for the two rules that I highlight, Article 34 and 35, and see if you can summarize them in your own words. There are some questions after it, and then we'll come back. Anyway, our last piece for today is this. I found a really interesting piece of art when I was student teaching that is about the scramble for Africa. It's the last piece of your document. So you can scroll down to the end and you'll see a couple photographs of it and a brief article about the artist. His name is Yinka Shonibare. And here's what that snippet says. It says, Scramble for Africa was a pivotal work in Shinibare. I don't like reading in public. It's not good. I can speak all day, but you know, when the words are on the paper, they kind of bounce around a little bit, and sometimes I read the wrong line. I'm just not a great reader. But guess what? I still managed to go to school for like 1,000 years. So you can do it too. Here, I'm going to embarrass myself. Scramble for Africa is a pivotal work for Shonibare in its exploration of late Victorian England and its territorial expansion of Africa during the 1880s. Shonibare's work depicts the Berlin Conference, showing various statesmen huddled around a table with a large map of Africa, eagerly staking their claims. In Shonibare's interpretation, the heads of state are characteristically headless and equally mindless in their hunger for what King Leopold II called a slice of this magnificent cake. King Leopold again. What a dirtbag. Scramble for Africa is presented upon a raised platform that is lit from underneath, giving it a heightened sense of visual drama. Like actors on a stage, the headless leaders motion to one another as they scramble for the riches of the continent. Shonibare says, theatricality is certainly a device in my work. It is a way of setting the stage. It is also a fiction, a hyper-real theatrical device that enables you to reimagine events from history. Scramble for Africa examines how history repeats itself. And when I was making it, I was really thinking about American imperialism and the need in the West for resources such as oil and how this preempts the annexation of different parts of the world. So what I'd like you to do is think about the way that Shonibare is describing this piece of art in light of everything that you've learned through this goofy lesson. And I want you to think about why these leaders are depicted without heads. What does that say? What is the artist trying to say to you? And then Shoney Bear also mentions that he was thinking about American imperialism. So I want you to add into your answer, how is this about American imperialism? Where has America imperialized? Have we done these things? Have we been this country before? Are we, at times, white people behaving badly around the world? I don't know. I'll open that door and I'll let you look inside. You get to decide. Justify your answer with as many examples as you can. And once you've done that, you can submit your document. And with that, I'm going to go vote. Yeah! Democracy!